Welcome to the Jeremiah Salmonson Show. I'm your host, Jeremiah Salmonson. Today, we are talking about the Sacramento Kings firing Mike Brown. Now, I know this happened a couple days ago now. I wanted to take a little bit of time to gather some of my thoughts on this situation, think about things, have a chance to reflect before I put my thoughts out there. I mean, I've put some thoughts on my social media, and we've been talking a little bit about it over there. But in terms of the actual long form here, I wanted to wait a little bit until I had a chance to digest things a little bit further. My immediate reaction, and my reaction remains, that the firing of Mike Brown was disgraceful for the Sacramento Kings organization. Now, it was on multiple levels. One, you're sending yourself back to the times of old, the coaching carousel every few years, replacing your head coach with another. Now, there's debate on if Mike Brown is the coach that should coach this team moving forward and things like that. Now, that's all can be debated. I'm okay having that debate. But the way that the Kings fired Mike Brown was disgraceful. You have to be better as an organization, and that is what Mike preached since he arrived in Sacramento. Mike was all about accountability. He was all about accountability. He said in his initial press conference when he joined Sacramento, vertically and horizontally, right, in Sacramento. He wanted the organization to be aligned up, down, sideways, and everywhere in between, all the way from the front office to ownership to the coaching staff. Mike wanted the team and the organization aligned in a common goal. And the way he was fired is just inexplicable. He is your winningest coach since Rick Adelman. In Rick's last year was 2006, so he's your most winning coach in 2 decades. He had a great year. His first year obviously broke the Kings playoff drought. Last year, a little bit of a regression, but still a winning team, still a winning season in a very tough Western Conference. And then the moment he really hits his first big piece of adversity, you fire him. And you fire him in the car on the way to the airport after running an entire practice, speaking to the media. We were there in the media scrum speaking to Mike Brown minutes before he was fired. I'm going to guess it was no more than 5 minutes after Mike Brown ended his media scrum. He got in his car to head to the airport to fly to Los Angeles, and the Sacramento Kings call him. The front office calls him and fires him. And there's a very short release put out by the Kings that said, from Monty, says, "We appreciate all of the contributions from Mike in this organization, but essentially we're moving on." The fact that they didn't talk to Mike in person or do it the night before, or let's say you didn't have all your ducks in a row, right? Let's say you needed some time to get your ducks in a row. Let's say the Pistons was the last straw. That loss to the Pistons was the last straw. So you're going to fire Mike Brown and you don't have your ducks in a row. And then you get your ducks in a row right before he heads to LA. So you just call him and fire him and do it then. Let's say that's even the case. What? You can't just wait one more game until he comes back from Los Angeles? You're going to let him run a practice, start driving to the airport, and then fire him via phone call. Absolute disgrace. So what I want to get into now is Mike Brown and what he brought to the Kings and whether this firing was necessary. Because I've heard a lot over the course of the last few days that, oh, this was inevitable. Oh, Mike Brown had to go. You can't lose 5 straight and keep your job. Mike Brown had to go. Mike Brown was not the problem here in Sacramento. Now, was he a perfect head coach? No. No head coach is perfect. Everyone makes mistakes. There were plenty of areas to critique him in his coaching this season, particularly some of his rotations and things of that nature. Maybe timeout usage. There were a few things in his coaching this season that you sometimes would scratch your head at and that could be critiqued. But he always would explain to you why he was doing what he was doing. And he would continue to pivot and make changes. And when you have a roster that is constructed the way that the Kings roster was, it's hard to blame him for wanting to make changes. I mean, there were times you'd have a G League team out there playing with one of your other players, like Fox or Monk or Sabonis, and then G Leaguers. And that's no disrespect to guys that are, younger or just getting started in their careers. It's just, it is what it is. And so I don't know how you can blame Mike Brown for that. He was a great leader. He was the only leader on the Sacramento Kings team, at least vocally. Now, there's lots about De'Aaron Fox, and if Fox is a leader behind the scenes, he seems to have taken accountability behind the scenes for the game against the Pistons, the day after, talking to his teammates, and it seemed kind of apologizing for what went down at the end of that game. That's good. I'm glad De'Aaron is taking accountability with his players and that's happening. But there's no public accountability. De'Aaron's post-game press conference was abysmal. He basically said it didn't matter what happened at the end of the game. No one would care. Whatever he said wouldn't change anything, wouldn't make anyone feel any better. It's not about that, though. It's not about making anyone feeling any better. It's about taking accountability for your actions. And Mike was all about accountability. That is what he brought to the Sacramento Kings. And since Mike arrived, and even his last media scrum with us, right before he got fired, minutes before he got fired, he was taking accountability for what he could do better. And he was telling us ways that he can improve. And then you go and fire the only vocal leader on your team. And some say that he was fired because of how vocal and how much he was publicly holding people accountable. People say that Mike lost the locker room or that players were tuning him out. There's a couple things I want to say about that. A, I'm not certain if that's true. I think that that's a big statement and that you really need more sources to back that up. I think it is possible there was a couple of players or a player that he might have lost in the locker room. But even if that's true, so I'll give that to you, even if that's true, that Mike Brown lost the proverbial locker room and that he was having players tuning him out for holding them accountable. How is that a Mike Brown issue? That is what coaches are for. You have to hold your players accountable. That is what coaching at every level of sports is about. The head coach holds your players accountable and coaches them up to fix mistakes. And ideally, the accountability comes from not just the coach, from the team, but that's been sorely lacking on the Sacramento Kings. So you take your only vocal leader in the organization, you fire him because he's holding players accountable. That to me doesn't make any sense. There's an article from Sam Amick and Slater over at The Athletic detailing some of this, and they talk about how maybe some of the post-game press conferences were starting to wear on some players. How is that Mike Brown's problem? He's talking about the same things over and over and over and over again, and the players on the court are just not doing it. Now, you might say, well, that's ineffectual leadership, or, he's just not an effective leader. I don't buy any of that, because this team just doesn't do the fundamental things that he's been preaching for a very long time. And we saw it against the Los Angeles Lakers. Doug Christie now, the head coach. And I understand Doug can't do a lot in the single shoot around that he had before this game as the interim head coach for the Sacramento Kings. So we'll get into Doug in a minute, a little more. But it was the same old thing in the loss to the Lakers. The same old tired story of they gave up 132 points and just the same problems are going to exist. And firing Mike Brown fixes none of that. What it was, though, it was easy to fire Mike Brown. It was easy to fire Mike Brown. Everyone telling me, oh, it had to be done. 5-game losing streak. The first bit of adversity that Mike really faces with the Kings, and I know there's been times last season and other moments where things have not been smooth sailing, but this 5-game losing streak, the way they've lost these 5 games all at home, the biggest part of adversity that Mike faces, and you fire him. This is why the Sacramento Kings aren't taken seriously, because of decisions like this over and over and over again. Michael Malone coached the Kings from 2013 to 2014. Tyrone Corbin from 2014 to 2015. George Karl, 2015 to 2016. And I know some of these seasons are kind of broken up, but you get the gist. Dave Yeager, 2016 to 2019. Luke Walton, 2019 to 2021. Alvin Gentry obviously took over 2021 to 2022. And then Mike Brown was hired from 2022, and he's fired here in 2024. And now we have Doug Christie, 2024 to ... not really sure. Mike brought stability to this team and to this organization. Here, we're going to roll a little bit of tape from a conversation I had with De'Aaron Fox at the end of this last season. So about April of this year, April 22nd of this season. I asked De'Aaron a little bit about how nice the stability is for the first time here in Sacramento. Mike Brown was at the time in the plans for this team as their head coach moving forward. And it's just, I guess, goes to show on how fast things can change in this business. Here's a quick clip of a conversation I had with De'Aaron Fox at the end of this season on the stability and where they need to go to improve for what would be this upcoming season. De'Aaron, obviously you've been here a while now. There's been a lot of turnover in your tenure here. But now the last couple of years, getting a little consistency from the coaching staff, obviously, and an opportunity to kind of build on things rather than every year tear it down and rebuild it. What does that mean to you personally, and what are you looking forward to like in this offseason? Obviously, there's some question marks, but just generally being able to build something for the future.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't know what happens this summer, but just having that consistency of some guys that you know are going to be here, coaches that you know are going to be here, it gives you that confidence knowing that you're going to take that next step forward and not have to wonder what the foundation is going to look like. And I feel like you can look at Dallas. Like last year, they didn't. Obviously, the year before they made the playoffs. Last year they didn't make the playoffs. This year, they make a trade at the deadline, and they look like honestly the best team in the league for after the All-Star break. So those are just like little things that you look forward to, and having that consistency as an organization. And I mean, it's fun. Obviously, and like we said, this conference isn't going to get any harder, but you don't want it to. I mean, it isn't going to get any easier, and you don't want it to. I mean, you want to be able to be a top of a conference like the Western Conference this year, and that gives you confidence going into the playoffs that you have a chance to win a championship. So if we are able to get better, if we're able to fight out and get a spot in this Western Conference, if we're able to get 50 wins like that gives you confidence. And like I said, 46 wins, we look at because we didn't make the playoffs, like, oh, that's not good. We're a couple blemishes away from having 50-win season, so I don't think we're very far off.
So you can see there, even what De'Aaron's alluding to at the end, there's things that need to be addressed on the roster. There's some pieces that need to fall into place. And they're still not fixed, but it's Mike Brown's problem. Definitely. Mike Brown's fault, certainly. Mike Brown is just a scapegoat in all of this. I don't want to hear anything about it had to happen. Someone had to get fired after 5 months. Fine. Fire the front office. They're the ones that haven't been able to fix this roster and the glaring weaknesses that it's had for years, at least the last year or more, especially after the Harrison Barnes move. This is just classic scapegoating. Mike Brown does not deserve the lion's share of the blame for where the Sacramento Kings are this year. If anything, it's the players that do. The Kings have the most talented roster they've had in probably decades, and they have not been able to figure it out. It's just a disaster the way that this is all unfolded. Slater and Amick also talk about in that article that they wrote for The Athletic, which you should check it out. It's a good article on how the front office acknowledges that they have some holes and they acknowledge that they have some weaknesses that they need to shore up on the roster. So if you're acknowledging that you have, if you're internally acknowledging that you have issues on the roster, how is that Mike Brown's fault? It's not. There's a total disconnect between the front office, their head coaching, ownership, and there's no accountability for any of this. You just fired Mike Brown because it was the easy thing to do, and he's the scapegoat. And now you got to find a new head coach. And, you know, whether you think Mike was a great coach, an okay coach, there's not a lot of good head coaches lying around, lying in wait for the Sacramento Kings to give them a call, especially not after a stunt like this. Why would a head coach want to come and coach the Kings? Mike Brown, a .549 win percentage as head coach for the Sacramento Kings. The most winning head coach for the Kings since Rick Adelman, who in his entire tenure had a .633 winning percentage in the regular season. Just shameful. On a personal note, I mean, it was a pleasure covering Mike Brown. Mike, you know, whether he would do things with the media and help show us different things that he was doing and schemes that he was doing in practices and trying to teach the game to us as much as he loved the game. He was easy to cover. He was great to cover. He was a great interview. He always would elaborate on your questions. He paid a deep attention to detail to your questions, and he was just a great person to cover, and I think a man with real integrity and real leadership qualities that the Sacramento Kings have now moved on from. So where do you go from here as the Sacramento Kings? You've appointed Doug Christie as your interim head coach. Doug, a great guy. I don't really know him that well, but Doug is from what I know, is a great guy, but he probably isn't yet qualified for this role. So I feel like he's being a little bit set up to fail here just because of his limited experience. I know he coached Summer League and, you know, I guess that's some good experience, but it's still very, very limited. So I don't think it's fair to this fan base. I don't think it's fair to the players. I don't think it's fair to Doug to insert him into this role right now. But so it is with the Sacramento Kings. So Doug Christie's the new interim head coach. And what I want to see moving forward, because, you know, we're not going to talk about Mike Brown much, covering the Sacramento Kings. Like, obviously, there'll be talk of him the rest of the season, depending on how things play out and things like that. But for the most part, Mike will be, you know, quote unquote, old news here soon. But what I want to see moving forward is the front office for this team held accountable. They need to be held accountable. The issues in this roster that have been clear for a long time, everyone has talked about them, have not been addressed. The Los Angeles Lakers just recently traded for Dorian Finney-Smith, who a lot thought last year at the deadline would have been a great target for this Kings team, and he would have been. Now, he's not roster fixing, but if you got him at the last deadline, you could have made more moves heading into this deadline to further shore up your roster. This front office has just been inept at making decisions to improve this roster. They don't seem to have any clear vision moving forward. So I want them held accountable by the fans, by the media, and I want to see the direction that they are wanting to move in. Their jobs are supposedly safe for the time being. That's what's being reported. I don't know how much I buy that, but we'll see, I guess, as the trade deadline comes closer. But I want to see them held accountable. And I also want to see these players held accountable. This is De'Aaron Fox, Domantas Sabonis, Keegan Murray, DeMar DeRozan as the vet of this team. I want to see all these players held accountable to the details that they did not pay attention to during the Mike Brown era, and as of the start of the Doug Christie era, continue to not pay attention to. I want these players held accountable. De'Aaron Fox needs to step up as what everyone tells me, he is a 1A player in this league, and I am a huge fan of De'Aaron, but he needs to step up, and maybe he's not what the Kings need moving forward at the centerpiece of this organization. I think that's a decision that could be made, and I think could be reasonable for the Kings. But I want to see a plotting forward from this front office, and I want to see what moves and conclusions they come to fix this roster. Because you fired Mike Brown, you fired your scapegoat, you have no other people to blame except now the front office and the players themselves. And as the Kings continue to lose games, and look, I take no enjoyment in the Kings losing these games. I think the fans deserve better. They spend their hard-earned money on season tickets, parking, concessions to go to these games. I think the fans deserve better. So I don't want to see the Kings lose further games, but I have no reason to think they're not going to continue to lose games. And I don't even think the loss to Los Angeles here in the first game of the Doug Christie era is rock bottom for the Kings. This can get worse. And unfortunately, I think it will get worse. So buckle up. We're back in basketball purgatory for the foreseeable future in Sacramento, and we'll see if these players and the new head coach, Doug Christie, in this front office can salvage the season that they think they still can.